We've probably all dreamt of moving to another planet, hopping on the next space shuttle to Mars like catching the next bus. But going to Mars right now and for the foreseeable future would probably be a killer holiday, literally. People think of technology as the limiting factor for space travel, but it's not. Human physiology is the limiting factor, says Dr. Thomas Lang. We've evolved on this planet to survive in some very particular conditions. There are humans on this Earth that are different to each other, living in isolated environments with unique adaptations. But Mars is an environment like no other, and getting there is its own challenge. So what would happen if you and I just decided to move to Mars? What would it do to our bodies, and would we have any chance at survival? Earth's magnetic field protects us from harmful solar radiation, and it's pretty enormous, but when we're on our way to Mars, not so much. On the Apollo missions, which only went so far as the moon, astronauts reported seeing flashes of light and experienced cataracts thanks to high-energy particles which deposited their energy in the astronauts' retinas. These interstellar voyaging particles are called galactic cosmic rays, and they are everywhere. Cosmic rays are a very dangerous form of radiation. They're created in the aftermath of supernovas, where dying stars become neutron stars. Neutron stars have very powerful magnetic fields, strong enough to ionize atoms, that is, to strip their electrons away from their nucleus. These naked nuclei are then fired at near light speed in all directions, and as they pass through matter, they can knock other atoms' electrons away, ionizing them too. Further still, this newly ionized particle can then become a sort of subatomic shrapnel, causing even more molecular collateral damage. These ionized particles, which we call galactic cosmic rays, can then collide with our DNA, breaking it or at least substantially changing it, which can lead to cancer. In 2016, when astronaut Scott Kelly returned from a year in space away from his brother, having been bombarded by these galactic cosmic rays, his DNA was different, despite the fact that the brothers were twins and should have identical DNA. But Kelly was on the lucky side in comparison to us, moving to Mars and all. The International Space Station orbits only 400 kilometers above Earth's surface, well within the protective range of our magnetosphere shield, which, by the way, reduces the amount of cosmic rays by 2/3. But on our 7-month journey to Mars, we might not be so lucky. NASA estimates that in that time, given our current spaceship building materials, there's an almost 40% chance of developing a life-ending cancer. But even if we make it that far, we'll still have what will feel like a mountain to climb. Your blood and your heart react strangely to 0 Gs. Normally, gravity helps to push the blood down to the lower areas of your body, like your feet or your legs, and we've evolved to do this because, well, we've always lived in an Earth-like gravity. In space, however, where there is little to no gravity, your blood and bodily fluids shift toward the upper body. Because there is so much more blood in the area around your heart, it grows in size in order to take account for this increased fluid flow. Think of it like a sinking ship. The more water there is on the boat, the bigger bucket you're going to need to get rid of it. This top-heavy blood distribution is so common in astronauts, it's even got a name. It's called puffy face and chicken leg syndrome. Your brain interprets all of this as a sort of flood, and so tells your body to get rid of excess bodily fluids. When we're on our way to Mars, we're going to want to drink a hell of a lot less, and we're going to need to pee a hell of a lot more. Because we're getting rid of fluid far quicker than we're taking it on, our bodies end up having less blood total. So our hearts, finally content with the amount of blood running through them, shrink again to normal size. But there's a problem there. In exchange for functioning at normal in space, our bodies have adapted by reducing the amount of blood that we have access to. So when we return to an area that has gravity again, we'll experience something called orthostatic intolerance. Under the weight of gravity, our hearts aren't able to maintain our blood pressure thanks to the decreased volume of blood in our bodies. This sounds difficult to imagine in a meaningful way, but actually, you probably experienced this a lot throughout your life. Whoa, head rush is exactly what I'm talking about. When you've been sat down for a while and you stand up, gravity pulls the blood down to your legs, decreasing your blood pressure. Your brain doesn't get enough blood, and thus it physically weighs less, and so you feel light-headed. Orthostatic intolerance would be like a head rush, but all the time and much worse. Astronauts today experience symptoms like lightheadedness, anxiety, heart palpitations, constant fatigue, and perpetual weakness. And that's just after a relatively short time in space. NASA estimates that after the duration of the trip to Mars, astronauts would be incapacitated. They'd have trouble walking and would have intermittent loss of consciousness. But even if we could walk, it would not be pleasant. Another severe side effect of space travel is a massive drop in bone density. As you walk around, you put a lot of strain on your bones. The more strain you put on them, the thicker they need to be. Two special cells called osteoclasts and osteoblasts regulate this thickness. When you're not straining your bones as much, the osteoclasts come in and resorb the bone you don't need. And when you need to rebuild your bone, the osteoblasts come in and rebuild where needed. But in space, there's no strain on your bones whatsoever, no gravity to force them to support the weight of your body. This interrupts the relationship between the two cells and means that your body only resorbs your bones without rebuilding them. Astronauts returning from the International Space Station after just 6 months had lost 10% of the bone density in their hips. So after a massively long journey to Mars, just setting foot on the planet would put you at serious risk of fracturing your bones. And worse still, the estimated recovery time for the head rushes alone is 2 years. We haven't even got to muscle atrophy yet, where in the far less demanding environment of space travel, your muscles waste away because they're not needed nearly as much. So you've arrived on Mars with an almost 50-50 chance of having a life-ending cancer. That's great. Not that you would know, since you're consistently lapsing in and out of consciousness, and even going to the bathroom to pee runs the considerable risk of breaking your bones. Now what? Let's imagine that you're moving to Mars, not colonizing it. You don't have to set anything up because there are people there who have already done that for you, which makes things easier. Upon arrival, you'd probably be quarantined forever. Mars doesn't have a magnetic field, and its atmosphere is extremely thin, less than 1% of Earth's, so it doesn't have that same interstellar padding that we do against those cosmic rays. For the last 4 billion years, whatever life may have spontaneously developed on Mars would have been denied permission to live. Whatever its DNA may have been composed of would have been obliterated by a cosmic ray cannonball. So since there is no life on Mars, none, not even pathogenic bacteria, which I guess is a bit of an upside, you would never have to worry about getting sick from infections. People who were born and lived on Mars would have extremely suppressed immunity. Without any bacteria to challenge their immune systems, Martians would lose the ability to fight off any infections you might have brought with you from Earth, so you'd have to be kept isolated from them. But it doesn't stop there. Cosmic rays have an agenda to prohibit life from existing on Mars, and unfortunately, you are not an exception to its rules. To bacteria, cosmic rays may be a barrier to life, but to us, they're still the same cancer-causing DNA jumpers. Stepping out of the spaceship onto Mars and into your new home doesn't stop the cosmic rays campaign to alter your DNA. So the more time you spend on Mars, the more likely you are to develop a terminal cancer. The only way you could avoid this would be to live in radiation-shielded homes with thick walls or buried 5 meters beneath Martian soil. When you go outside on Earth, you're at risk of getting cancer from UV rays fired from the sun, but that risk is small. On Mars, however, it's 5,000 times as high. You'd probably have to stay indoors all the time, which I guess wouldn't be that bad. You're quarantining anyway. At least you've got a great view of the Martian wasteland. Or do you? The things built on Mars that would allow for expansion, like your house for example, would have to be scavenged from Mars itself, materials mined from the planet, not FedExed from Earth. So there's a definite element of economizing involved. Radiation-shielded windows like lead glass, for example, are expensive, not just in cost, but in terms of materials and production. You have to remember that the Martians have to find, mine, transport, process, and install these things in your house before you can move in. So it'd probably be cheaper and easier to just bury you 5 meters beneath Martian soil, or for your house to just not have windows. And even if you could go outside, it'd be impossible to breathe. You'd need to take an oxygen tank with you anywhere you go, like, for example, to meet a real Martian colonist, whom, of course, you would only be able to shake hands with through the medium of a spacesuit. But if you did meet a Martian face to face, a human born and native to the Red Planet, what would they look like? How would human physiology adapt to these adverse conditions? In such a dramatically different environment, men and women who moved to Mars and their children would eventually evolve into a different species. Martians would become a real thing. By some estimations, it could be as short as a few hundred generations, or about 6,000 years. That might seem like a long time, but consider that the humans alive today are the same species as the humans that lived 100,000 years ago. The reason that it could move that fast is again thanks to those cosmic rays responsible for causing cancer and liberating us from the fear of infection. Since Martians will be isolated from us Earthlings thanks to their compromised immune systems, people, even when we're sharing the same planet, will probably reproduce with other people of the same planet. Martians with Martians, and rarely, if ever, with Earthlings, which narrows the gene pool, accelerating Martian evolution. On top of that, people born in a Martian colony will probably have vastly many more mutations than people born on Earth, again thanks to those DNA jumbling cosmic rays. Since they're going to be experiencing radiation 5,000 times more than what we experience in a normal lifetime, it's very likely that their skin pigmentation will change. As a human species, we use the pigment melanin to protect us from harmful radiation. The more melanin you have in your skin, the more protected you are from the sun's radiation and the darker skin tones you have. Given the massively greater amount of radiation Martians would be exposed to, they'd probably have incredibly high levels of melanin pigmentation, so they'd probably have very dark skin. It's also possible it could be the complete opposite. Since they're spending so much time indoors, they could become paler as the radiation shielding around them replaces the need for melanin. It's also quite likely that some of these mutations will lead to humans who require less oxygen to survive. This might sound a little extreme, maybe even a bit X-Men-like, but the same thing has already happened with societies living in the Himalayas, where the oxygen content of the air is 40% less than at sea level. Martians would also have denser bones, larger eyes, probably all be short-sighted, and have bigger heads. The gravity on Mars is 62% less than what it is on Earth. So after birth, Martian babies' bone densities will decrease a lot faster than they would here for the same reasons they decrease in astronauts. So much so that at the point at which a Martian female is ready to have children, they would have lost so much bone density that their pelvises would be at risk of fracturing during childbirth. As a result, mothers whose bones were bigger would have a much better chance of surviving childbirth. If they start out with thicker bones, they'd effectively be buying themselves more time to give birth safely before their pelvises would fracture during childbirth. They'd then pass that quality onto their children, who would probably spend most of their life indoors. Because of this, Martians' eyes would lose the ability to see far distances. Studies here on Earth have shown that people who spent most of their life indoors when they were children have a much greater chance of being short-sighted. But in the time that they do spend outdoors, they'll experience what will look like much cloudier days than on Earth. Mars is much further from the sun than Earth, and our eyes are accustomed to seeing a very particular amount of light here. Bright, sunny days on Mars would look like overcast days on Earth. To allow for these lower ambient brightnesses, our eyes would increase in size to allow us to have bigger retinas to absorb more light. And since there is a much greater risk of death during childbirth for women, C-sections would probably become much more common. The human head size is limited by the width of a woman's pelvis. As a baby, your head can only grow so large as to fit through your mother's pelvis without getting stuck. But thanks to C-sections, your head could be much bigger. In fact, the increase of C-sections down here on Earth has meant that there are more babies with larger heads. And since Martians would have thicker bones and bigger eyes, they'd probably end up with bigger heads, not just thanks to the way that they were born, but also to protect those large eyes with something more robust. All of this sounds thoroughly uninviting, I know, so why in the hell are we even trying to colonize Mars to begin with? If it's unavoidably perilous, sort of a voluntary death sentence with a lead up of pain, disorientation and discomfort for years beforehand, why on Earth are we trying to put people there permanently? The answer is surprisingly simple. Dinosaurs. We're currently on our way to an extinction level crisis in climate change. We're kind of still in the middle of a not really extinction level event with COVID. Just a few decades ago, we almost had another one with our ozone layer. Before that, the dinosaurs went extinct thanks to a comet that struck the Earth. Maybe we'd run out of food. Maybe we'd go into an ice age after a super volcano eruption like the one lurking beneath Yellowstone Park. Maybe our atmosphere would be evaporated by a gamma ray burst from another galaxy. You just don't know what would happen between now and the end of life on Earth as we know it. Our planet is fragile, our existence more fragile still. Moving to Mars is a matter of preservation. If we spread our species across 2 planets, it protects us from extinction should something happen to Earth. Mars has water trapped in the soil, the most valuable resource in our solar system. It allows us to create our own oxygen without having to ship it from far away. It also has materials we could use to fabricate machinery and build a colony from within. It's not a tourist attraction or a holiday destination, it's a life support system for our entire species. And the irony is that by being on Mars and growing a Martian colony there, by the time an extinction level event came around, Martians would probably look little like humans on Earth. In reality, maybe Mars isn't a life support system for us, but a cradle for something new. Thanks for watching.